Welcome to the deep dive.
Today we're diving into something pretty fundamental, actually. It's this idea that, well, in a world that just keeps changing faster and faster,
Uh-huh.
the only real way to stay ahead, the only sustainable advantage, is being able to learn faster than everyone else.
Right. Learning faster than the competition, faster than the market changes. It's not just a nice to have anymore, is it? It's becoming the core skill, more than just training, like a meta skill.
Exactly, a meta skill. That's a great way to put it. So our mission today is to really unpack that. We've got a stack of sources here, everything from, ancient military thinkers to modern brain science, even looking inside places like Pixar.
Wow, quite a range.
Yeah, and we want to figure out the actual mechanisms. How do you build that speed? How do individuals and organizations cultivate this?
And it feels like it requires reframing leadership itself,
Yeah,
moving away from the old command and control model.
totally. Yeah. We're suggesting the leader needs to become, well, the chief learning officer. Their main job isn't just directing traffic. It's cultivating this constant adaptive growth in everyone.
So if you're listening and thinking, okay, how do I actually do that? How do I build a high-performance learning culture? You're in the right spot. We want to give you the shortcut. Get past the buzzwords.
Yeah, straight into the practical stuff.
Yeah.
The mindset, the structures, the strategies, what actually works.
Okay, let's unpack this. So where do we start? It feels like it has to begin with the individual, right? Because a learning organization is just, well, it's made up of people who are learning.
Absolutely. And the sources are really clear on this. The absolute starting point, the thing everything else is built on, is actually admitting ignorance.
Which sounds simple, but
But it's surprisingly tough, especially for people who are already successful, right? For leaders.
yeah,
Saying, I don't know, or I got that wrong, that takes real vulnerability.
it does. I like the analogy in the source material about skills versus character.
Oh, yeah, the piano or tennis thing?
Exactly. If you sit down at a piano or step onto a tennis court, you can't really fake it. Your skill level, or lack thereof, is immediately obvious to everyone.
Right, it's testable
Yeah.
instantly. But things like character or emotional intelligence or leadership judgment,
Much easier to put on a front. You can project confidence, act like you've got it all figured out.
and that mask, that pose, is the biggest barrier to actually getting better, to learning.
So the sources push this idea. Real growth means consciously remembering you don't know everything. You have to embrace that ignorance. Like if you think about personal development as moving from level 2 to level 5.
I can't just jump. Right.
No, you have to take that first honest step towards level 3. You can't start a journey without step 1, and you can't learn if you're afraid to show you don't understand something.
Even asking a simple clarifying question in a meeting like, sorry, what does that acronym mean? It seems small, but it requires that humility, and it can unlock understanding for everyone.
Okay, so humility first. Admitting ignorance, what's the next layer for the individual?
Well, once you have that baseline, it's about building the right mindset, the growth mindset.
Oh, yes, the growth mindset. We hear that term a lot.
We do, but it's not just, positive thinking. It's a core belief system about whether abilities are fixed or if they can be developed.
And the sources define it with some specific components.
Yeah, 3 core things, really important for leaders and employees. First, a real enthusiasm for teaching and learning. Second, being genuinely open to feedback, giving it and receiving it.
Okay, that feedback piece is huge.
It is. And third, the ability to actually face obstacles and work through them, not just avoid things that look hard.
So it's about training people to believe they can grow.
Exactly. Because if someone deep down believes their intelligence or talent is fixed, like a number, they'll play it safe. They'll avoid challenges where they might fail, because failure feels like a final judgment on them.
Right. But if you believe effort and trying new strategies can make you better.
Then failure is just information. Feedback becomes helpful, even if it stings a bit. You see it as a path to improvement, not a verdict.
And this connects to the emotional side of learning, too, doesn't it? We focus so much on IQ, the thinking part of the brain.
We do. We measure cognitive skills endlessly. But the sources point out that the emotional brain, the part that controls anger, patience, empathy, is separate. And it's shaped by our experiences.
So if that emotional system isn't well developed.
Then you can have someone incredibly smart, high IQ, but if they lack emotional control, if they can't handle frustration or listen patiently, they become, as the sources put it, a high potential liability.
High potential liability. That's striking. Why?
Because that lack of emotional regulation, even with brilliance, leads to problems. Academic failure, addiction, toxic behavior in the workplace.
Mhm.
If a brilliant person can't listen or tolerate different views, their intelligence is actually hampered. They can do more harm than good.
So this leads to that interesting paradox from Maslow you mentioned earlier. If we want better leaders, better organizations, maybe we shouldn't be trying to suppress our basic human needs or instincts.
Exactly. That's Maslow's topsy-turvy paradox. Traditionally, we think of institutions, laws, schools, even corporate rules as things meant to control our base instincts.
Right, keep things orderly.
But Maslow flipped it. He said, what if these instinctoid needs things like safety, belonging, feeling respected, reaching our potential? What if they're actually good and necessary for us to thrive?
So institutions shouldn't suppress them, but foster them.
Precisely. Safeguard them, encourage them. If an organization wants high performance, it can't ignore these fundamental human needs.
Which needs specifically should a leader acting as this chief learning officer focus on protecting?
All the big ones. Safety, and that includes psychological safety, feeling secure enough to speak up.
Mhm.
Love and belonging, feeling part of a team, connected. Self-esteem, feeling valued and competent. And then self-actualization, the drive to grow and contribute fully.
So if you demand top performance, but create fear or isolation or constantly undermine people,
You're cutting off the fuel supply for learning. You need that foundation of emotional security before people are willing to take the intellectual risks that learning requires.
that makes perfect sense. And it sets up the next stage beautifully, moving from individual safety to creating that safe space for the whole group to learn together, building that feedback engine.
Right. So the individual overcomes their fear of looking ignorant. Great. But now the organization faces this other big psychological barrier, what the sources call the personal model, or the illusion of totality.
Ah, the idea that we all think we see the whole picture, but we really don't.
Exactly. Our brains are constantly constructing reality, filling in gaps based on our own unique experiences and biases. It's like that magic trick analogy.
Where the magician distracts you.
Right. Distracts you from one thing, but also relies on your brain automatically filling in what it expects to see based on past experience.
And in an organization, that means we're all walking around with slightly different versions of reality in our heads.
Pretty much. The 40% rule idea, maybe only 40% of what we perceive, is direct sensory input. The rest is our brain filling in the blanks, constructing a coherent story.
So we think we see the whole situation objectively.
But we're seeing a sliver filtered through our own personal model. And because our own model is the only one we experience directly, we naturally assume it's the most accurate, the most complete.
Which leads straight into confirmation bias.
Bingo. We actively look for and favor information that confirms what we already believe, and we tend to ignore or dismiss evidence that contradicts our model. It makes it really hard to genuinely value different perspectives.
So the leader's job, the chief learning officer's job, is to build ways to deliberately break through that illusion.
Yes, and that's where ideas like the Pixar brain trust come in. It's a structure specifically designed for critical feedback, but with a crucial twist.
What's the twist?
The core principle is that the feedback, the different viewpoints offered, are seen as additive, not competitive.
Additive, not competitive. Explain that.
Well, in a competitive setup, like a debate, you're trying to win. Your goal is to prove your point and disprove the other person's. In an additive model, the goal is to collectively improve the thing you're looking at, the movie scene, the project plan, whatever.
So even if someone's specific suggestion isn't used,
The perspective still added something to the group's understanding. It helped refine the final solution. The pressure shifts from defending your turf to building something better together.
that Incredibles anecdote from the sources really illustrates this, doesn't it? It's fascinating.
It really is. So Brad Bird, the director, shows this argument scene between Bob and Helen to the brain trust.
And the feedback comes back that it feels wrong somehow.
Right. The group's diagnosis, the symptom they identified, was that Bob seemed like he was bullying Helen. So the suggestion was rewrite the dialogue, make Bob softer.
Which, in a less safe environment, the director might have just done, right? To appease the group.
Absolutely. But Bird knew the dialogue was right for the characters and the conflict. He felt the brain trust was right that something was off, but they'd misdiagnosed the cause.
They identified the wrong symptom.
But because the environment was safe and the feedback was seen as additive, aimed at helping, not attacking Bird, could take that friction, that feeling of something's wrong with the power dynamic, and keep digging.
And he realized the problem wasn't the words, it was the visuals.
Exactly. Bob was just physically huge compared to Helen in the scene. So the solution wasn't changing the script, it was changing the animation.
Helen stretches. Elastigirl asserts herself visually to match Bob's presence.
Right. She visually claims her power in the frame, matching him. No dialogue change needed. It's brilliant. And the lesson is huge. The brain trust's specific advice was technically wrong.
But the process worked. The safe, additive environment allowed the director to use their feedback to find the real, non-obvious solution. The value was in the friction and the trust.
Which means leaders can't just hope feedback happens. You have to actively solicit it, especially the dissenting views.
Yeah, you have to invite people to disagree, particularly when there's a power difference or the stakes are high. People won't risk it otherwise.
They'll default to silence or agreement. So the chief learning officer has to use specific language.
Not just any questions, which
Okay.
usually gets crickets.
Right. More like, okay, what am I missing here? Or does anyone see this completely differently? Explicit invitations for dissent.
And then you have to actually listen and respect the input, even if it challenges your idea.
Crucially, you have to show that disagreement isn't just tolerated, it's valued. It's essential for breaking through that illusion of totality and getting a complete picture. It changes the whole dynamic.
Okay, so we've got the individual mindset, humility, growth belief, emotional regulation. And we've got the collective dynamic additive feedback, psychological safety, inviting dissent. Now, how does the leader structure the organization to support all this?
This is where we see that big shift from control to cultivation. The sources contrast two leadership styles pretty starkly.
The diminisher versus the liberator?
Exactly. The diminisher, sort of the classic tyrant style, maybe micromanaging, creating stress. What happens? People shut down. They only offer the safest, most predictable ideas. Thinking gets diminished.
And trying to centralize all decisions in that style just creates bottlenecks, right? Especially when things are complex and moving fast.
Totally. Decisions crawl because everything needs the boss's approval. The sources are clear. That kind of centralized control just breaks down when faced with real-world complexity. It fails.
So the alternative is the liberator style, the chief learning officer approach.
Yeah. The focus shifts.
Sure.
Instead of controlling everything, the leader focuses on creating stability, safety, and momentum, making space for others to step up and lead within their own areas.
It's more like gardening than commanding.
That's a good way to put it. Cultivating the conditions for growth. It's an eyes-on, hands-off idea. If the leaders have a really good shared understanding of what's happening across the board, they don't need to meddle in every detail.
And that diffusion of power actually makes the organization faster and more resilient?
Paradoxically, yes, because decisions happen closer to the action, informed by local context.
Okay, so part of cultivation is dealing with failure constructively, not just accepting it, but learning from it systematically.
Right. Institutionalizing learning from failure. When things go wrong, the first instinct might be to find someone to blame.
Yeah, cover your bases.
But the learning organization resists that. It looks inward and asks, okay, what in our system allowed this to happen? What are the underlying problems?
Like the Pixar example with the new directors who struggled.
Exactly. Instead of just saying, well, that director wasn't good enough, they asked, how did we fail to prepare them? That's a systemic question.
And they realized their early successes, Lasseter, Stanton, Doctor, were maybe outliers, not the norm.
Yeah, they realized those guys succeeded almost despite the system, through sheer talent and grit. Relying on that model to develop, everyone else was flawed. They had to own the systemic failure in their preparation process.
That's a much harder conversation to have than just blaming an individual.
Much harder. And it highlights the difference between tackling an acute symptom versus a chronic problem. Many organizations just chase quick fixes, the personality ethics stuff, techniques, workshops.
Without addressing the underlying low-trust climate or the systemic issues.
Right. And if you don't fix the chronic condition, the acute pain just keeps popping up somewhere else.
So how do you make learning more concrete and action-oriented? That Pixar Notes Day sounds like a fascinating structure for this.
It really is a brilliant example. Imagine over 1,000 employees signing up, tackling over 100 different topics and scores of sessions. Just a massive organizational brainstorm and self-reflection.
Huge scale. But the magic wasn't just the discussion. It was the output, right? The exit forms.
Right. Yes. They didn't just collect a pile of notes. They had this color-coded system. Red forms for specific proposals ready to go. Blue for ideas needing more brainstorming. Yellow for immediate best practices to share.
So it immediately sorted the ideas by actionability.
Exactly. But the real key, the accountability engine, was in the questions they asked on those forms.
It wasn't just, what's your idea?
No, it was. Define the benefits to Pixar. specify the concrete next steps, and crucially, who should pitch this idea.
Ah, so someone had to be named, someone had to own it.
Yes, that last question is genius. It prevents good ideas from dying in committee. It identifies a champion who's responsible for taking that idea directly to the leadership team. It built a pipeline for action, not just
Oh.
a suggestion box.
And when organizations don't have these kinds of mechanisms to connect learning to action, that's when you get strategic dissonance.
That's often a major symptom, yes. Strategic dissonance is basically the gap between what a company says its strategy is and what it's actually doing day to day.
Like saying you're customer-focused, but all your internal processes make life difficult for customers.
Or saying you're innovating, but you punish any experiment that doesn't yield immediate results. It happens often when senior leaders are stuck in old ways of thinking, inertia, past successes, sunk costs.
While the people on the front lines are already seeing the reality shift.
Precisely. The Intel example from the 80s is classic. Senior management was debating for ages whether to get out of the memory chip business.
But the people actually scheduling production.
They were already quietly shifting manufacturing capacity away from memory chips towards the more profitable microprocessors just based on the real-time market data they were seeing.
Wow. So the actual strategy was being made on the factory floor way before the executives officially decided.
Exactly. The de facto strategy diverged from the de jure strategy. The chief learning officer needs systems to surface that frontline learning, to hear those signals from the people closest to the action, and bring the official strategy into alignment with reality. Otherwise, you're flying blind. #KV. Learning in high-stakes environments, warfare and statesmanship.
It's interesting how these ideas about learning aren't just modern business school concepts. The sources ground them in much older, higher stakes contexts like warfare and governance.
Absolutely. When the cost of poor strategy or slow adaptation is literally life and death, the need to learn fast becomes incredibly sharp.
Like Clausewitz, the military theorist, rejecting rigid formulas for warfare.
Right, he knew war is inherently fluid, uncertain, interactive. Your strategy has to constantly adapt to the enemy's moves, the changing terrain, the fog of war. It's very similar to navigating a volatile market.
And that ancient idea about distributing forces, how does that apply?
So there's principle, yeah. Basically, you can't strengthen everywhere at once. If you try to defend every point equally, you'll be weak everywhere.
So if you spread your resources too thin across too many initiatives,
You achieve nothing significant. True strategic learning involves making hard choices, focusing your resources where they'll have the most impact, even if it means consciously deciding not to do other things. If everything's a priority, nothing is.
that requires real discipline.
It does. And leadership in these high-stakes settings also demands empathy as a form of learning. Look at Cyrus the Great leading his armies.
He didn't just push for maximum speed.
No, he realized the fastest way overall wasn't necessarily the quickest pace for his strongest troops. He had to adapt the pace to the strength of the whole army, making sure no one was left behind or pushed beyond their limit.
So for a leader today, that means
Don't push your team so hard on innovation or change that you break them or leave crucial parts of the organization unable to keep up. You have to manage the learning pace for the collective capacity, ensuring everyone feels supported and able to contribute. Burnout is a strategic failure.
this feels like a natural shift now from how we learn to what we should be learning for, moving from military strategy to the purpose of governance.
Exactly. The sources bring in thinkers like Aristotle, who saw ethics and statesmanship as deeply intertwined.
He argued the goal wasn't just power or wealth, but eudaimonia.
Right. Often translated as happiness, but it's much richer than that. It means human flourishing, thriving, living a life of purpose and virtue. For Aristotle, the goal of a good state, a good community, was to enable that flourishing for its citizens.
So how do we translate that to an organization a chief learning officer should aim for?
Not just profit maximization, but creating an environment where employees can thrive, find meaning, and contribute to something larger than themselves. Organizational success should ideally contribute to broader societal well-being, not just enrich a few at the top.
Cicero seems to echo this with his ideas on justice.
Yes. He talked about balancing private ownership with contributing to the common good. Following nature, he said, means strengthening social bonds through mutual support and contribution.
So organizational learning shouldn't just be about internal efficiency or market share. It needs an ethical dimension.
That's the argument. Learning needs to be directed towards improving the whole system, fostering a sense of shared purpose and mutual obligation, both inside the company and in its relationship with the wider community.
And this brings us to motivation. What drives this kind of deeper learning? The sources look at the Bhagavad Gita here.
Yeah, introducing the idea of the modes of nature, sattva, rajas, tamas, as influences on our actions and motivations, including how and why we learn.
Okay, break those down. Sattva is.
The mode of goodness.
Yeah.
From this mode, the Gita says real knowledge develops. Understanding, clarity, a focus on long-term well-being and liberation.
Then rajas.
The mode of passion. This fuels ambition, intense activity, but also greed, attachment to results, constant striving. It leads to a focus on short-term gains, often creating instability.
So a lot of corporate drive might fall under rajas.
You could argue that. And then there's tamas. Ignorance, inertia, delusion. In organizational terms, this could be clinging to failing strategies, denying reality, fostering toxic or fearful cultures. It leads to foolishness and decline.
So the highest form of learning, according to this view,
Comes from transcending the lower modes, especially the endless craving and volatility of passion, rajas. It involves connecting learning to a deeper sense of purpose, self-realization, service, what the Gita calls kenya consciousness. That connection provides a more stable, enduring foundation for learning and leads to a kind of transcendental fulfillment.
So translating that for a leader today, the most powerful sustainable learning cultures are fueled by a genuine shared purpose, sattva.
Not just by quarterly targets or individual ambition, rajas. When the why behind the learning is clear, ethical, and focused on the common good, the learning itself becomes deeper, more resilient, and ultimately more effective. #V.
Wow. So pulling this all together, this deep dive really shows that learning faster isn't just a tactic, it's woven through everything. Individual character, team dynamics, organizational structure, even our ultimate purpose.
It really is. That competitive edge comes from integrating all three layers. Developing individuals who can admit ignorance and embrace growth, building collective structures like the brain trust for honest additive feedback, and guiding the whole effort with a clear ethical strategy.
And the leader as chief learning officer is the architect and cultivator of all that. It demands courage to face failures, to invite dissent, to confront that strategic dissonance.
Absolutely. It's a continuous, sometimes messy process. It requires focusing on building the capacity for learning, not just chasing the immediate results, honoring the journey, you could say.
Which brings us to that final thought to leave our listeners with, drawing from Lao Tzu.
Right. He spoke about the power of following the way, the Tao, something elusive, hard to grasp, but the source of real certainty and spirit.
So the provocative question for you, the listener, is this. What might happen if you shifted your focus, even slightly? Less pressure on the immediate, quantifiable results of learning initiatives.
And more attention to patiently, consistently honoring the process. The messy, sometimes slow, ongoing journey of growth, both for yourself and your team. How might embracing that way of continuous learning transform your part of the world?
Perhaps the greatest leverage comes not from forcing answers, but from building the conditions where new understanding can naturally emerge. By actively seeking out and valuing those different perspectives, you turn potential conflict into your greatest asset for genuine growth and lasting success.